Hi friends, thanks for joining me for another Monday Makes video. Today I'm going to show you how I make bokeh or a bokeh background for a card. It's pretty easy. It is a little time consuming. So I'm using watercolor paper and I'm going to tape the paper down to a board using low adhesive painter's tape, and I'm really going to press the tape edges onto the paper really well. I'm going to use a lot of water for this technique, so I need the paper to stay flat and to dry flat. I also like to dry the paper naturally, so by taping it to the board allows me to move it aside so that I can work on other projects on my craft desk because I got such a small space. So I'm using re-inkers today for this project. These bottles are concentrated inks for the ink pads. So I'm using Island Indigo for blue, Crushed Curry for yellow, and Rose Red for red. And I'm spraying a lot of water with my mister on the paper before I start. And I'm using a paintbrush to get full coverage. So watch how the ink starts to spread and move and blend. It's amazing. I'm trying to let the water do the work for me, but I'm helping it a little here and there to get the entire paper covered. Such a neat effect. And there's a lot of water on there, so I'm really glad that I taped it down. I want full coverage, so I'm just going over the bits and pieces that didn't get covered, and then I'm going to sort of tip it to one side the other to make anything excess run around. And then I'm just using a clean paper towel and blotting up the excess. So I let the paper dry completely before the next step, and it's really important. I've found that if the ink, the first layer isn't dry, it will start to contaminate the next layer. So previously off camera I die cut several sizes of circles out of acetate, and you could use any plastic or cardstock for this. I found that acetate was my best bet, and I'd have it for future use. So I've had some post-it tape on the edges so that the circle doesn't shift on me while I sponge. So I'm just using a little sponge here and dabbing it and sort of rubbing it. The first circle is the biggest one, and it should be the lightest application of the white craft ink. As the circles get smaller, I get heavier with the ink. And just to note, the ink will dry lighter. So I dried the ink in between each circle size. So for the smallest circle, well, we'll get to that. So I'm just randomly placing this big guy. And yes, my fingers did get a little inky at this point. Just trying to get the ink down such a large space, and then I'm just sort of rubbing to and fro. I think the biggest pitfall with these acetate circles is that some of the paint seeps underneath the acetate, and I even have some Tombow mono adhesive there. I put it underneath the circle on the paper side and let it dry, and as a temporary adhesive, and I still got some bleeding underneath the acetate. So not so much on the big circles, but the more ink I laid in, the heavier, or the more little bleeders I found. It doesn't really matter though. I mean, it's a homemade card. Just be careful. The technique I started with was pretty much get the middle done and then softly go around the ends. And if you have to go back, you go back. And there's the third size. I think I did 5 in total of circle sizes. And seriously, my heat tool, amazing, was, working overtime on this. Although I let the background paper dry naturally, the ink, I was too impatient. I wanted to get on. My fingers were messy already, so move it along. So I found that mostly, yeah, I had to go over each circle. Like the first circle I went over just once, the second circle I went over twice, third circle sort of, you know, heavily 3 times. And then by the fourth circle, I was like, okay, I need a very heavy application here. So I used my finger dauber or sponge dauber. And the best technique with this utensil, first of all, it was great because my fingers didn't get ooky, which I liked. And I found though I couldn't rub back and forth, and so I just sort of had to daub. But it did give me the coverage that I was looking for, so that's great. And I'm serious, this craft ink, crazy how long it takes to dry. So it's a pigment ink, so it sort of sits on top of the paper, which is different than other water-based inks, which actually sink inside the paper and stain the paper. This sits on top, so the actual paint has to dry, or the ink has to dry like paint. And let's see, for the smallest circle, I just ended up using the sponge dauber itself. And I was careful not to, you know, really squish in. I just kept on daubing, maybe 5 or 6 daubs. And I did this, this layer, I dried it in between, and then I did it a second time. So I really wanted those white ones or the small ones to be fairly dark. Okay, so to remove the tape, which I really adhered well, I pull it back over itself to prevent ripping of the paper. Even though it's low adhesive, I made sure to really press it down at the beginning, so now I'm taking care to remove it nicely. And that board was just a press board. It was like an old shelving unit that I had that I no longer have, so I just kept the cupboards or the shelves with it. Okay, so you're probably wondering what I did with that blue ink, and here it is. If I can, I like to do 2 or more techniques in different colors. So I'm doing a dry test here. I'll be embossing in a minute, and I'm really glad I did that because some powder is sticking to that white craft ink. So I need it to dry the ink a little more. Surprise, surprise. Heat tool to the rescue. It does take a while to dry. So I use my embossing buddy, and then I'm ready to stamp my sentiment from the Something Something stamp set with clear Versamark ink. And I cover it with the black embossing powder there. And the other sentiment is from Sassy Salutations. And I'll be using my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. I really liked how these ones turned out. Really fun and playful. You don't really need a lot of embellishments after you do this. Oh. Really, the card does the background does the talking for you, really. So cool. And do you notice how nice and flat that paper is? It's because I've taped it down and took care. And there, the heat embossing, fantastic. I love that effect. So nice. Okay, so that's the card for today. I just put matching cardstock on the back and made 2 cards. I hope I've inspired you to do this technique on your cards or journal pages. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, bye.